portion of the senior competences for the class of 2010. We are glad he has joined us for this presentation by Miles Peterson, and his topic is on the problem of overfishing. We do have some basic rules we ask you to please observe. Please do not leave early. When the doors are closed for presentation, we ask that no one comes or goes until the presentation is completed. Please help us maintain a respectful atmosphere. As the assessment is based on the students' performance and their interaction with the panel, the audience is asked not to interact with the panel or the presenter during the presentation or the collaboration. And so we will be asking questions, but we ask that you all just listen for this time. The student presenter gets to decide whether or not to allow photography, videotaping, or recording.
Yeah, that's fine.
And please do not plan on staying on campus if you are not observing the next presentation. We hope to keep distractions to a minimum, and that involves quiet in the hallways, atrium, and courtyard. What is yours, Miles?
Good morning. My name is Miles Peterson, and I will be presenting on the problem of overfishing. The bounty of the ocean is running out. People thought that a resource as vast as the fish in the ocean could never run out, and it appeared that this was true for thousands of years. But recently, commercial fishing companies are fishing at a pace that cannot be sustained. Aided by modern technology, the companies are far exceeding the sustainable catch rate. The fish populations do not stand a chance. To stop this problem, the number of fish caught needs to be drastically reduced. My thesis is that the natural fish populations in the oceans are at risk of total depletion and need to be restored by lessening the total amount of fish caught, using a variety of methods including stricter fishing laws, fish farms, and marine protection areas. Commercial fishing is not a new business. It has been going on for thousands of years. But overfishing is a relatively new problem. This is because up until about 100 years ago, fishing technologies were not advanced enough to put a significant dent in the total fish populations. As technologies improved, the number of fish caught began to drastically increase. Greenpeace estimates that between 1950 and 1994, commercial ocean fishermen increased their total catch by 400%. Because of this sudden jump in the number of fish caught, fisheries around the world began to experience shortages. One major fishery collapse that made headlines was the New England cod fishery collapse in 1992. According to Mark Kurlansky, the author of Cod, a book about that collapse, 40,000 people lost their jobs in that single fishery collapse. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, estimates that 75% of the ocean's total stock has been depleted in the last 100 years. And they estimate that by 2050, 90% of the ocean's fish will be severely overfished. There are many different causes of overfishing. One is supply and demand. The commercial fishing business is extremely competitive. As long as there is high demand for a certain species, the companies will do whatever it takes to meet that demand. The leaders in the commercial fishing industry are China, Japan, the US, England, and South Korea. Traditionally, these countries fish their own waters, but now that their own waters have become overfished, they are turning to developing countries to meet their demand. One example is the world's largest fish market, which is Europe. It brings in $20.6 billion per year, but 60% of the fish sold in Europe are caught in developing countries. This is according to a study published by the United Nations. This move has been good for the companies because they are able to meet their demand fairly cheaply, and it has also been fairly good for the developing countries as it provides jobs, but it has definitely not been good for the fish populations. As stricter fishing laws are being made, more and more companies are turning to illegal fishing. The UN estimates that 30% of all the fish that enter Europe are caught illegally. Another major cause of overfishing is the problem of bycatch. Bycatch is when fish or marine life other than the targeted species are caught and killed. NOAA estimates that 25% of all fish caught are bycatch. This means that 27 million tons of fish go to waste each year. This is 5 times the weight of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Overfishing cannot be stopped if this horrible wastefulness is allowed to continue. The problem of overfishing is a huge global issue, but in order for me to understand this problem, I needed to look at my personal responsibility towards the problem. One key part of understanding my personal responsibility towards this problem is that I'm a Christian. Being a Christian is a significant factor because I need to not only look at what I think should be done to stop this problem, but also what responsibilities I'm charged with as a follower of Christ. One verse that helps me understand my personal responsibility towards nature is Genesis 1:28. It says, "God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" So the core question that I get from this verse is, how should people effectively rule over creation? When God created the earth, humans and creation were in a perfect ruling relationship. This relationship was not a relationship in which humans exploited creation or disregarded the well-being of creation, but rather it was a relationship in which humans and creation mutually benefited. This was how God intended the world to be, but man destroyed this relationship in the fall. Genesis 3:17 says, "To Adam he said, 'Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree which I commanded you, you must not eat. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life.'" Because this relationship was broken, humans began to exploit creation. So how do we work to restore this perfect ruling relationship? One thing we can do is to look to the example of Christ's servant leadership. It is evident from the washing of the feet in John 13:14 that Christ was a perfect example of servant leadership. People need to realize that they can't always only think about themselves, but need to have creation's benefit and restoration in mind. So how can this biblical principle of servant leadership be applied to commercial fishing? Commercial fishing companies need to stop only thinking about their own profit, but need to take into consideration the overall well-being of the fish populations, even if it means a little financial loss to themselves. One key guideline to use when thinking about environmental issues, like overfishing, from a Christian perspective, is that in an effective ruling relationship, the ruler must model servant leadership. In order to model this servant leadership, people need to try and minimize the negative environmental effects of their actions. One key to minimizing these effects is awareness. Governments and companies need to do research to find out how their actions affect the environment. With regard to the problem of overfishing, research needs to be done to find out how fast certain species reproduce and therefore at what pace they can be fished. With these guidelines in mind, what can be done to help stop overfishing? At the most basic level, the number of fish caught needs to be reduced. The main cause of overfishing is simply that too many fish are being caught. So the simple solution would be just to reduce the number of fish caught. But this solution is not nearly as simple as it sounds. There are many cultural and economical factors that make it hard to drastically reduce the number of fish caught. I will now be describing a few possible methods that will help reduce the number of fish caught and therefore help stop overfishing. One way to reduce the number of fish caught is by making stricter fishing laws. Commercial fishing catch limits need to be made much stricter, and in order to establish effective catch limits, research needs to be done to find out the growth rate of certain species. And then limits need to be set so that those certain species have enough time to grow to an age at which they can reproduce. Making stricter catch limits is not a very popular solution among the commercial fishing companies because they think that they will lose money. but they need to realize that if stricter catch limits are not set now, they will be the ones that will eventually suffer the most when the fisheries collapse. Another thing that needs to be done is to make fishing laws universally applicable. In order to do this, the UN needs to take control of the situation and force countries to make fishing laws that meet a certain international standard. Another thing that needs to be done to help stop overfishing is to stop illegal fishing and bycatch. Some things that can be done to stop illegal fishing are making stricter regulations on the fish trade so that the seller needs to be able to prove that their fish are caught legally. Another thing that can be done is to spend more time and money on enforcement of catch limits and no fishing areas. As I mentioned earlier, the issue of bycatch is a major cause of overfishing. In order to reduce bycatch, laws need to be made that force commercial fishing boats to use nets with larger holes, escape hatches, and also using circle hooks when long lining. All these methods are meant to let non-targeted species escape unharmed. One commonly used method to combat overfishing is fish farming. Fish farming is when fish are raised in pens or ponds and sold for a profit. Most of these farmed fish are used for the seafood industry. There are two main types of fish farming. The first is using massive pens in the ocean, like this one, to raise large amounts of fish. The other type of fish farming is where fish are raised in small inland ponds. Recently, there has been considerable opposition to the first type of fish farming because scientists say that these large pens in the ocean damage the natural ecosystem as disease spread from the farm fish to wild fish. On the other hand, the small inland ponds are a great way to fight overfishing. These ponds do not pose any considerable threat to the natural ecosystem and provide a good alternative to commercially caught fish. For my project, I raised money and took it to a fish farm in Thailand. I raised money by giving tennis lessons to elementary kids and was also able to raise awareness as I gave a short talk after the lesson introducing the problem of overfishing and telling the kids how their money would help fight it. The farms that I took the money to in Thailand raise tilapia fish and sell them to local villagers. These villagers, in turn, raise the fish in small ponds and either eat them or sell them for a profit. The fish farms also take pressure off of the commercial fishing that goes on in the local rivers and lakes, and also provide jobs and food for local villagers.